Hey, everybody. Welcome to Love and Relo, the voice of the relocation industry. I am your host, Ben Cross, and I am joined by my wonderful co-host today, Sandy McKinney from Weichert. Hey, Sandy, how's it going?
Hey, Ben. It's great. How are you doing today? I know you're the road warrior of the week.
Oh my gosh, I am amazing right now. I am in Columbus, Ohio at EE Ward Moving and Storage, the oldest Black-owned company in America, 140 years old this year.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And they're in our industry, and they've also been on Jeopardy, little known fact. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, so I'm doing great. I'm excited about today's show, another in our series of Thursday mentoring. You've put together a great panel for us today.
Yes. So today's session really, Ben, is going to be talking about how senior leaders within corporations in our industry identify high potentials and what they do in that mentoring of those high potentials, as well as also mentoring folks at making sure that they can deliver a really high level of service delivery. So I think those are the discussions. Let's take this conversation where it may go. Okay.
Yeah, awesome. And also, if you're out there right now, hit that like button right now. Throw it in the comments. Want to know who you are, where you are. Check in with us. Let me know you're out there. If you have questions for everybody, I'm going to be working the questions. So keep me busy, and we will prioritize those for William and Vicki and Sandy and myself. So thanks, everybody. Go ahead, Sandy.
Sure. Well, let me introduce our guests today. We have two of our senior leaders. Ben, do you want the honors to introduce Vicki and William?
No, Sandy, go for it. I mean, right, yeah, go for it.
I love it. All right. Well, our first guest is a very good friend of mine who I have the privilege of working with here at Weichert. Vicki Lander is our Executive Vice President of Client Services out of our Chicago region, and she is running all of our client services groups across the globe. And Vicki, welcome to the show, and I'm really pleased to have you join us today.
Thanks, Sandy. It's great to be here. I've been watching the show vicariously since the start of the pandemic, and hats off to Ben for what he's built here. It's pretty fun to watch each week.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And our second guest today is the infamous, if you will, William Taylor from Relocity, coming from San Francisco, right, William?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Sandy, Vicki, Ben. Always a pleasure speaking with you all. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, we appreciate you being here, Ben. We really are starting to gain some momentum. A lot of folks are starting to really reach out with some questions and with some challenges on where we can take this program. And again, I want to thank you for the platform and the ability to bring these speakers to the industry and share their ideas on how we can, if you will, gather some information for them as mentors. So let's start out, Vicki. Let's talk a little bit about high potentials and how. And the theme today really is taking it from a real structured approach that Vicki's going to talk about within Weichert, and then talk about from William's perspective, maybe not so structured, and some of his experiences on how mentoring, high potentials and identifying high potentials in this industry, and how those individuals can tap into the resources. And like Ben says, please keep your comments coming. Please keep your questions coming. We're ready to answer those questions. So let me start, Vicki, with you as far as what are some of the things that you look for in a high potential and how you start tapping them moving forward?
Yeah, you bet. It's kind of a tough question, Sandy, actually, because I find that high potential talent really shows up in a variety of different ways. It's really heavily dependent on the individual, maybe their level, their experience, and also their personality. Some folks are just more outgoing and raise their hand more frequently, and others you kind of have to ferret out by getting to know them a little bit. The things that I really look for is those that raise their hand, those that ask to be involved, that really lean into solving problems, proactively present ideas, those that seek opportunities versus waiting for opportunities to come to them, have a natural curiosity. Ben, as I mentioned, I've been watching your shows, and you and Heather Henry actually talked about, being curious is really a very good thing. Asking questions, wanting to learn more. Those that embrace change, I mean, it's the one thing we're never going to stop, right? It's the one consistent in our lives. So I really look for high potentials that really run to the change versus those that are change adverse. And the other thing is looking at their engagement. Those that contribute really fully at the maximum and are getting fully satisfied in their career really are standouts for me when I think about high potentials. Ironically, I mentioned while we were backstage that I'd been in New Jersey this week, and I was speaking with the head of our talent and development team and was telling him about the topic for the show this week. And if you know Chris Bernone, you'll know that he is famous for acronyms. And when I mentioned to him, how do you identify high potentials in the organization? His model was all around the acronym of DICE, which stood for Determination, Insight, Curiosity, and Engagement, which really was the same as mine, but said in a much more concise and eloquent way.
And no, Ben, that does not mean the casino crap table.
I know. I was changing 100. Yes. No. So it was. I just want to put that in the notes here for everybody. Can you say that acronym one more time for me, Vicki?
Yeah, you bet. DICE: Determination, Insight, Curiosity, and Engagement.
And I think that's really interesting when you start going down that path, Vicki. So tell us a little bit about, because some of the audience has really asked questions, and William, we're going to get to you in a sec here. But a lot of the audience has asked the question, sometimes I'm intimidated to go to a Vicki Lander and ask, hey, I want to be engaged. I want to be considered for this position. What's some of your recommendations on that engagement there?
Sure. Well, and you're right, Sandy. It really does start by managers having frequent conversations with their employees. If managers aren't engaging with their staff, to expect an employee to raise their hand and say, hey, I want to be mentored in this career, it's just not going to happen. So you do have to have really regular, frequent conversations. But I would say it really is in the court of the employee to really be responsible, accountable, and drive their career. So assuming managers are having frequent conversations, one of the tools we often use here is something we refer to as an X model, or an engagement conversation. But in that, we really, ahead of the conversation, and ideally, an employee would request a conversation like that. And ahead of that, they would use a little chart that we've developed where they plot their satisfaction and how they see themselves contributing in the organization. And the goal is that the manager would do the same thing ahead of the discussion. And then as they meet together, they would talk about what one or two things could that employee do that would raise their contribution to the organization or raise their satisfaction in the job that they're doing. And the manager would talk about how they might support that. And you would be amazed in having those conversations how many opportunities are identified for colleagues. It might be, they just want exposure to another department. They want to meet with a leader and explore, is leadership in my organization something I want to do? Not too long ago, I had someone come to me, ironically, and said, hey, I think I want to be a salesperson someday. And how would that work out? They're a counselor in our organization today. And so we talked about it for a while, and we talked about why they were interested in that. And we talked about what a career path to get to sales might look like for them. And so we really just built out a career path for them based on that conversation. I had them first meet with several account managers, and they kind of liked the feel of that work. And so we included them in some of the training that we were doing, some of the book clubs, an initiative that we had around our trusted partner. So they liked that a little bit, still wanted to explore sales. And so I reached out to several members of our sales organization and said, hey, would you have a conversation with this young woman and talk to her about how you got into it and what a day in the life is like? And sometimes we find opportunities for them to actually shadow in that. So that's an example of an informal, mentoring program that just came out of a regular one-on-one conversation that a manager is having with an employee.
That's awesome. William, let's engage you a little bit here. And I know you've got some examples from your previous employment at Adobe and others, but why don't you share with us some of those examples and your take on this?
Well, I would love to say that, I agree with everything Vicki said. And I think wrapped around all of that is this, as we look for high potentials, it's individuals who really bring emotional intelligence to the workplace, who understand sort of how their actions impact others. They observe that. They observe how others react to them. They're calm under pressure. They bring optimism to every situation. I think Vicki noted, they're interested in learning. They wake up every day and say, what can I learn new today? What can I take on that would help me become a better employer or a better leader? And how could those skills then translate into the impact that we make for our clients? I think the interesting thing about mentorship, it is there's sort of no wrong or right way to get into it. It's get into it and know that it's an ongoing conversation. One of the things that I was really proud of that we did at Adobe when I was there is our HR leader, who is now the CR, I reported to an individual named Donna Morris, who's now the CHRO over at Walmart. And Donna was well known for being one of the first leaders in our space to eliminate the annual review. The very formal process of using all these forms. And, we don't always fit into those annual reviews. And so it was sort of an interesting story because she had gotten off of a long trip to India and was having an interview with, I think it was the Times of India. And they said, hey, what's happening in HR? What are you going to do next? And of course, HR had spent months and months preparing for the annual review. And she said, we're going to get rid of the annual review. We're going to move to this check-in process. And it was really well received. And we saw a number of other companies adopt that model where, the mentoring and leading others on your team is really about an ongoing conversation. And I think high potentials and high performers understand that feedback mechanism and really sort of are hungry for that feedback. Mm-hmm. And Vicki, I love what you gave it as an example about, getting them into the game as well and identifying those opportunities to connect them with others in the organization or maybe even outside of the organization who can help them achieve those goals that they're after.
Exactly.
I want to hop in here if I can. First of all, we got some great people checking in here. Want to give a bunch of people some shout outs for checking in. Also want to ask you to ask your questions as well for William, Vicki, and Sandy and myself around identifying talent in the organization and handling high potentials. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the feedback process, whether the annual review process is kind of what you use and what you're comfortable with, or you think it could be if you think it could be changed. I mean, I've heard a lot about 360 reviews. Obviously, that's happened for a while. Mm-hmm. This whole check-in thing and the informalness of it. I have questions around, okay, how do you structure, raises and things like that? Because those are typically they come with periodical. So let's see here. We got people checking in. Stacy over here at Quill. Let's see here. Rocket, Stacy at Rocket almost said the Q word, Stacy. I'm really sorry about that. Jeez, please give me a break. Stacy Huff checking in, super producer Stacy. What's up? Love to hear your questions. Stacy, got a lot of Stacys. Let's see if we got any more Stacys. Nope. Barbara. Hi, Vicki and Sandy, not William. Let's see.
It's okay. It's okay, Barbara.
Let's see. Val, great group deluxe checking in from H-Town. What's up, Valerie? Alan King from Germany. Jana from Brazil. This is great. Exciting for this expiring show. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Hey, if you have questions, I'd love to hear them. Christina, hi, Vicki, William, and Sandy. Thank you for putting this together. Christina's been great, checking in a lot. David, she really has. David Fennel, great to see this panel. Wonderful. Mike Quigley, shout out to William Taylor.
Thanks, Greg.
Relo City. Look at this. Liz checking in, making sure everything's technically sound here. It's not, Liz. Thank you. Vinny Valverde from Portland, Oregon. What's up, Vinny? Love to hear how you've seen talent, high potentials managed and things like that. Richard Majewski, London calling. Looking forward to another great show. Love to hear all of your questions. I have one myself, and this one's actually for Vicki and for William and Sandy, really. We're talking about identifying these high potentials and what we look for. You talk about hand raisers. You talk about naturally curious people. You talk about people that are fully engaged and optimizing their career opportunities. How do you hire for that? I mean, it's great when it's right in front of you. And I mean, frankly, we all know high potentials stand out in the crowd, right? But how do you get them in the building? Because I tell you what, as a hiring manager, I feel like there's a real blind spot for me. I can't tell a high potential. I can't tell a high po from a low po. Okay. So can you guys give me some tips on that?
You know, Ben, one thing I will tell you is that old saying of birds of a feather flock together is very true when it comes to high potentials. They do really search each other out. And so one of the ways we've had a lot of success is just in our employee referral program. So reaching out to those folks that, you know, really are recognized as high potentials that have come in the doors already and asking them to refer us to others. I don't know about you, William.
No, absolutely, Vicki. I think employee referrals are our strongest hires, tend to be our strongest hires. And it's certainly an effort at Relocity as well to grow that program.
Yeah.
So then in that case, if birds of a feather flock together, if the employee that refers the person is not a high potential, do you automatically just say, thank you so much, I appreciate that? Or do you know?
That's a great question.
Yeah, well, and you know, not everybody is a fit in this industry either. So, you know, you may have some high potentials that are referred to you, and once they learn what we do here, they're not ready to sign on for all of the craziness either. But I think it you know, it's really part of the skill in interviewing and watching their response, seeing how they prepared for the interview. You know, have they done research on who they will be meeting with and what the industry does and those kinds of things, really showing signs of that, being curious ahead of showing up for the meeting. You know, I think through appropriate dialogue, just like you're having with those employees to recognize the high potentials, you find them and they bubble up the same way during the interview process.
I think absolutely, Vicki. I think as well, they're curious to know who their colleagues will be and what projects those individuals have led. I think high potentials often look for really strong managers and strong leaders to work with, and they are attracted to organizations. I think there is I think there's an assumption that people leave or join organizations for dollar amounts, and that is it tends to be the leadership and the managers and the projects that drive those decisions.
You know,
and
go ahead, Sandy.
Then if I can just interject one thing here. One of the things that I find with high potentials is sometimes, and we've talked about this a few times already, some people don't necessarily believe they're a high potential. So if you asked your audience now, and Vicki will be back with us, if you asked your audience right now, do you consider yourself a high potential? I'd be very interested to hear what people have to say about that.
Should we ask them? Should we ask them to self-identify?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how high potential are you?
Because I think what's critical about that, Ben, is that if we don't believe we're a high potential, how are we going to convey that to William or to Vicki or to you that we're a high potential, right? So if we don't believe in that, we have to be able to have that limited belief, like we've talked about, removed so that we can go into that interview or have that dialogue with individuals who are going to set us up for that interview so that we're prepared for that.
You know, so along those lines, so we started talking about leadership as well, and the leaders, and that brings me to kind of another question. There's some great questions. Men, I see your question. Richard, you got great questions there too. Keep those questions coming. William, I'm going to go back to something very specific that you said. You were talking about changing from an annual review process to a check-in, and if I may self-identify as a high potential, I always enjoyed FaceTime with the boss. Even though sometimes the boss scared the hell out of me, I always loved finding myself in the room with the boss and just having that conversation and that FaceTime. Even if it was criticism that I got, I still got jazzed about being in the room with the boss. Two questions about the changing from from the annual to the check-in piece. One, I made a joking question, but now I'm really actually curious. How do you manage like raises, increases, and like, things like that when you change from an annual basis to kind of a more fluid basis? And that was a second question.
Yeah, so there are still annual reviews when it comes to adjustments in salary, comp, etc. But the point is that when you're having an ongoing conversation, and Vicki pointed it out, is having those weekly one-on-ones with your team, your colleagues, the individuals who report to you, and making sure that you're having an open and transparent dialogue around what's working, where are the growth opportunities, where might the adjustments might be made, where can you give some honest feedback. And that leads to an annual review cycle that there are no surprises, right? There was no formal documentation around here's how we score people. It was managers are given a sort of a pool of comp to work with and determine based on where their employees are how that is distributed.
Okay, so that's great. And then Vinny says we are all hypo. I just need the right leaders and companies to believe and trust you. Yeah, that's awesome.
Amen.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to go to Mena's question here because Mena's out in Dubai, and Mena's always looking how to like really crack into the global mobility business, and she's kind of out there in Dubai. And I just sense her searching, So Mena has a great question about this process. If we're going to adopt the ongoing conversation and feedback cycle, how will we manage this during work from home? I notice a lack of engagement between employees and their leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do think that's the beauty of that engagement conversation that I was talking about, where you've got kind of a little model that you can work from each and every time. We'll be happy to share that grid with you, Ben, and you can pass that along to your viewers. But in that, it sets the framework, right? So while you're not together in the same room and you're maybe not able to pick up on the same body cues, you're using a framework that you both understand, you're plotting from the same perspective. And again, you're talking about how to move my satisfaction and my contribution forward. I think that's a very different conversation than the performance conversation that you were just talking about. And it's really putting that employee in the seat of driving what will drive their satisfaction in their job 1 or 2 points higher on that grid that I mentioned, or what will allow them to contribute more fully. And sometimes, pre-pandemic, we would have employees say, well, if I could just adjust my hours, I think that would really help me with my work-life balance a little better. And when I get here, I'll be in a much better frame of mind to start my day versus worrying about whatever I did before I got here. Sometimes it's things like that you ferret out. And other times it's, like the example I described where the person wanted to explore a sales career. Say, I sense that I'm hitting the ceiling in the work that I'm doing right now. And yet I don't really know which direction I want to head. I'd like to explore this. If you could make it possible for me to kind of watch or mirror or shadow that department, I think that would really allow me to think about my next step in the organization. So it really is about those frequent connections and not in the context of that performance review, which is really kind of an intimidating context many times, right? Because you're kind of all geared up for what you're going to experience when you go in to get that annual review. This is a real frequent dialogue. And again, I wouldn't even put a routine cadence around it, but put it in that employee's court to raise their hand and say, hey, I'd like to have an engagement conversation. Could we schedule that for next Friday? And, beforehand, like I said, each party would think about where they would plot themselves in that satisfaction and that contribution box.
I love that. I love the call out around a conversation that is very specific to that employee's growth and development versus a one-on-one that might be more focused on the day-to-day business activities. Exactly. And that's really important to separate those.
Let me unmute myself. But the beauty of that whole engagement is it doesn't have to be so structured that it's only with the hiring manager or your manager. It can be very organic in organizations. I've worked for a lot of organizations where that conversation is taking place among colleagues and other parts of the organization, because I see myself going here, or I can remember the day I was in client services and I decided I really wanted to take that leap of faith and go into sales. And that was back in 1992, 93. And so when that happened, and yes, I just dated myself, and I had been in the industry for a while, but the bottom line is that opportunity was given to me because I had access to leaders within the organization besides my manager, who I could go to and have that dialogue. I thought Mr. Ben was frozen, so we'll just continue to talk here a little bit.
Sandy, I want to double click into that thought for a second, because I think I've probably mentioned this to you and Vicki at some point. The idea that so it's sort of around sort of within this same conversation of mentorship, but it's more around the idea of having professionals from the corporate side spend some time shadowing or on the supplier side. I have had the good fortune of being on both sides of the industry. I spent the majority of my time on the corporate side, and coming to the supplier side, there's a lot of aha moments. There's a lot that happens sort of behind the curtain that a lot of corporates are not aware of. And it would be a great experience for those individuals, just sort of live in the shoes of the consultants or the client service directors or the finance folks or supply chain, to just see how that day-to-day, that machine works. I think it would be such a benefit for our industry to build something like that.
I agree. And you know, it's kind of a good segue to the next session that we're doing. We're doing the next session with corporates only. So we've invited several corporates to come on and talk about mentoring other individuals who want to be corporates. But I think it's a great idea about taking it and how do you want to be interacted with as a supplier and a corporate representative? I think that's a great point. And that's part of our mentoring as an industry. Don't you agree, Vicki?
Absolutely. And, you know, I'm sitting here thinking about these concepts, and they're really kind of informal mentoring, right? Comes out of an engagement conversation or an employee, you know, expressing interest in what another department does or another industry does related to mobility. But there's also the concept of a more formal mentoring program, which, you know, we've done several times in our own organization here. I think that does put a lot more accountability on the employee, the mentee, that is going through that formal mentorship program. I think one of the things that's important in that is that they are invited to kind of identify a couple of folks that they feel they would really succeed under working with as their mentor. But, you know, really outlining some very formal steps that they would take, whether that's, you know, a book or what they would like to accomplish in specific, and building a real formalized plan around that mentor. So I think that's the other piece of mentoring. It can be informal, or it can be very structured and very formal process for colleagues.
I agree. I don't have the questions here, so I can't get them up, but I'll see if Stacy, a shout out to Stacy, if you could throw a few of those questions up, that would be great. Sorry about that. I don't know where Mr. Cross went, but he'll be back eventually, I'm sure.
I did see a note. He said his Wi-Fi died.
He lost his Wi-Fi.
He lost his Wi-Fi. Okay. Well, we'll be guy. Here we go. We'll keep thriving here. So let me ask a couple questions as far as mentoring for really high quality service. I mean, both of you have been leaders in the industry for quite some time. And I think as we've all mentored individuals, it's, you know, one thing to teach individuals how to do their job and to guide them in, hey, I think you'd be really good in this position or that. It's another thing to really identify those individuals that have that serving heart, that have that capacity to be that quality, high driven service person. What's your take on that? William, why don't we start with you?
Gosh, that's the million-dollar question, right? Is how do you identify empathetic leaders who really are passionate about making an impact on others? I think it's spotting individuals who do the right thing when nobody's looking, and really are motivated by that positive impact on others, and recognizing how critical our work. We're sort of the we're sort of the unsung heroes, the mobility team, right? We've always, for years, we've talked about that seat at the table. I've said for years, we already have the seat at the table. Let's not blow it. Let's make sure our voices are heard and that we demonstrate the massive impact that we make, not only on the employees and their families, but on the overall organization. This is a very unique industry. And when I meet folks who are sort of new to our industry and young and are still learning mobility, I try to get them excited about the opportunity to learn something new every day, whether it's tax, immigration, relo, payroll, trailing equity, whatever it might be. You will learn 1,000 new things every week, and you'll probably forget them the next week. Certainly if you're like me, and I lost my reading glasses yesterday, right, Ben? And now I'm worried about the videos here going backwards. I'm having all kinds of, age-associated issues here. But I think it's really just I think you can spot those individuals. Vicki mentioned it earlier. They sort of tend to flock to each other. And I think you start to drill into asking them for examples of, where they made an impact for another individual, and see how it impacts them emotionally. I think you can sort of, you can identify the individuals who have that empathetic mindset and are just really, really pleased with what we do in the world of mobility and how we impact others.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on that, Vicki? What would you like to add there?
Yeah, well, I thought of that earlier when I was talking about the interviewing process and how kind of high potentials identify themselves right at the early entry. And, as we do a lot of interviewing as our company is growing, one of the things that I have found, we're a service business, so we need to really have service-minded individuals and looking for those that are really selfless. I mean, let's face it, mobility, if you're looking for all the glory, to William's point about unsung hero, you're not going to find that here unless your glory comes from watching someone else have a seamless experience in the relocation. So, looking for that selflessness, I guess, really has helped me identify people that are going to be good service professionals. I also think good listeners. Part of being empathetic is really listening and being mindful and anticipating the needs of the customer that you're serving. So I would put those in the category, Sandy, of things that I look for to identify, and those we coach for as far as improving service.
And I think it's kind of interesting because for me, I think once you come into this industry, pretty quick if you're going to stay. And those of us that have chosen this as our career path for a number of years, we've chosen it because we fell in love with the industry and we fell in love with the serving heart that we bring to the industry. And, and it's interesting when we go back to the question, who identifies themselves as high potentials? It's interesting because you have the side of the fence that's always going to raise their hand, like myself, and say, yeah, I'm a high potential. And then you're going to have the other side of the fence that are going to say, yeah, I think so. And I want to be, and I'm not too sure. And it's that fine line I call, that fine line of humility. And, is it that you're thinking of yourself less, or that you're basically thinking of, yourself in a position of, well, I know I can do this. So that confidence versus arrogance, if you will. So help us with that, Vicki. Help us with that.
Yeah, I would argue, Sandy, that we are all high potentials. It's a matter of unleashing it and finding the right fit. And so, probably beating a dead horse here, but it's those frequent conversations that really unveil that right fit and, allow a leader to open the doors to unleash that full potential in an employee. So I would argue that the comments out there are absolutely right. Everyone is a high potential. We just have to find the door to open that lets it shine.
And to that point, Vicki, I think, there is this assumption that high potentials are always the ones who want to climb within the organization and take out more leadership roles. And I think it's important as a leader to appreciate that there are many high potentials who are quite happy being individual contributors and growing within that role, however they might be able to broaden the scope of their role, but just happy with that, not necessarily saying, well, I want to be a people manager or I want to lead a whole organization. That doesn't need to be their path. There are plenty of, and I love it. I think everybody is a high potential, and it is just how do we open that door for them and give them those opportunities to grow and learn.
I totally agree with that. I love that. I love that because I do believe in that. I do believe everybody has it inside of them to be there. It's tapping into that potential and finding what fits for you. I mean, we talked about that a few weeks ago with Sue Carey and Pam Jacknick and Mike. We talked about what's important to you and how you fit into this organization. So, Vicki, give us some examples of how you've worked with some young professionals and how they've developed their careers, and give us some examples of that.
Yeah, well, I mentioned the young woman in our organization, Sandy, that wanted to pursue sales. Ironically, I'm actually mentoring an employee that works for one of our clients currently. She's looking to develop in her organization, and her leader reached out and said, hey, I'd like her to grow her appreciation for the supplier side of this business. And really see where that might allow her to go within our own organization as she broadens her appreciation for the industry. And so we meet on a frequent basis. We're actually leveraging a book called Raise Your Game, and kind of doing our own internal book club, if you will. And so we each read a chapter of that book and come back and talk about it and where it might apply. And then she's been coming back, testing some of that, and then she'll come back. But it's allowed us to build a relationship and interweave inside this book club. I can give her some learnings around inside tips, tricks, how the business works from the supplier side, which has allowed her to be more thoughtful in her recommendations internally about their program. So that, other aspect of this that you might consider, Sandy, beyond the show is that, this doesn't have to stay within just the corporate world or within the supplier channels or in an RMC world only. It really has a lot of cross-functional opportunities available for mentoring as well.
Oh, Sandy, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, guys, we've had technical problems today. I would love to hear from the audience today and hear about some of the questions you're having. Sorry about the technology challenges, but Stacy, if you could throw some of those up. Okay, William, I can say that moving from the RMC to the corporate side has been extremely helpful in my career. So, and that's kind of interesting from that perspective. So maybe. And I can only imagine that that's been a great opportunity for you, Vinny. But William, why don't you share a little bit about moving from the corporate side to the service side of things and how that benefited you?
Oh, absolutely. I think it just gave me a new appreciation for everything that happens on the supplier side. I think sometimes when you're a corporate, it's always sunshine and rainbows and it never rains. And I say that jokingly. Of course, it rains. But there's just an amazing dance that happens on the supplier side to make the magic known as a successful relocation or assignment happen. And again, Vicki, I love that you're mentoring one of your clients and that she has this opportunity to see behind the curtain and understand what's happening, because there are a million different touch points. And I've said this before as well. A shout out to the relocation consultants and mobility specialists on the RMC side and the corporate side as well. But the consultants on the RMC side have such a tough job. They're managing this complex supply chain. They're being that single point of contact in many cases and trying to project manage this very complex dance. And they're doing it for dozens of active clients at one time. And again, it can be a thankless job. You're going to have transferees who say, I don't like the art in my temp housing. Can we change it out? And you're thinking, you're kidding me, right? This is a real example from my life. But those are the kinds of things where, can that individual exert calm under pressure and simply say, yes, I'm going to find a way to make that happen for you. I think, again, success in our industry is about finding out how do we get to yes, saying, not necessarily saying, no, we can't do that, but saying, we're going to explore how we make that happen for you, and applying that sort of flexibility. For me, it's been a real eye-opener as well in terms of opportunities for greater efficiency between the suppliers, between the third-party suppliers, being a destination services provider who works very closely with many of our RMC partners, and just understanding what are the data points that are important to you and your clients. How can we share that in a more effective and seamless way? How can we develop a common language? I know the ERC has been working on some of that. I'm not necessarily saying that APIs are the saving grace for everything, because there's time and resources and effort that goes into building them and maintaining them. But I think as an industry, there's a tremendous opportunity for us to just become more efficient. And again, that's been the aha moment for me, coming from the corporate to the supplier side, and seeing the amount of resources that as a supplier you dedicate to supporting your RMCs. Of course, always for the benefit of our end clients. But it tends to be a heavy lift at some point, and you say, gosh, there has to be a better way.
No, I think that's an awesome point. And Richard has a comment here, and I don't think it's a naive question, Richard. It's saying, assuming mobility between organizations on the increase, how close are we to point where investment in mentorship programs does not show the ROI, because the mentee leaves the company. And that's always, and especially in today's environment where folks are jumping quite a bit. Vicki, why don't you kind of address that and how you're identifying that?
Well, I would go back to that engagement conversation, because, when you are really fully satisfied and fully engaged in your job, the temptation of looking for a new job is greatly diminished. So I think colleagues really value the fact that the organization is investing in them, spending time with them, looking for opportunities for them to really feel fully fulfilled in their job. So I would actually argue back. I mean, I hear Richard when he's thinking about maybe the formal aspects of it, or formal coaching, which can be a costly investment. But I think the simple things really help to cement employees to their organizations, because they do really recognize this company's invested in me. They care about me. They want to help me grow and fulfill my passions, my career desires. So I actually think that really stems that versus drives it away.
And I think too, if I could add there, Vicki, if I can add on, and hi, Gaia, from that perspective, I think, and this is looking at it in a very unselfish perspective, that as you mentor employees in whatever company, whatever company chooses to do that formally or just organically, I say we're bettering the industry. To me, I have a bigger challenge when that individual leaves our industry and goes into another facet. I mean, to me, we understand what thrives this industry, and it's good serving hard people. And so as we, move through our career, if that's the right choice, I think we're all supportive of that. So William, would you agree to that?
I would fully agree. And again, to just refer back to my time working under Donna Morris, Donna used to say at Adobe, if an individual leaves Adobe because we don't have the opportunity for them to grow and learn, that's our bad. That's our failure of our leadership and failure of the company, and we should support them. We should support their growth, whether it's within our own organization or at another organization. And sometimes it's simply a testament to your mentoring and to your company if that individual leaves and takes on a different leadership role, hopefully within our industry, as you pointed out, Sandy.
Absolutely. And I agree with Galia here as far as Vicki. It's true about selflessness and having empathy with great listening skills. And Christina, my first trainer, told me that 2 things would happen by the end of my first summer. You'll either fall in love with mobility or you'll run the other way, right? Isn't that the truth? Oh, and our fearless leader is saying it's funny that so many people would categorize others as high potentials than would identify themselves as high potential. That is funny, Ben, and that's the world we live in, and that's what Vicki was saying, right, Vicki? As far as we all have it, we have to unleash it within ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finding the right fit, the right place to unleash it, right?
Exactly.
You've got to be passionate about what you're doing.
Exactly. And it's important to have that. So I don't know if Ben's back or not. I was speaking with a couple corporates who say that a good mentor will
I
tell
don't
you.
know. Can you hear?
It's off and on, Ben.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, no.
Yeah, we can.
We can
Yeah,
hear you,
we
bud.
can.
Well, read the.
I'll read the statement. It says, Ben saying, I was speaking with a couple corporates who say that a good mentor will tell you to get out of mobility because there's not a good career path. But what do you think about career prospects on the corporate side versus the service provider side? So William, I'd throw that one to you since you've had both of those experience.
You know, we're all in it together. We work seamlessly as a team, it discourages me sometimes when we talk about corporates versus suppliers. You know, we are all one talent mobility organization, and that's one of the things we all love about this industry is we're in it together. We go to our conferences and we high five when somebody that we're competing with wins, and we love to see everybody win because there's plenty of business out there and there's plenty of opportunity for all of us to grow. So I think there are massive opportunities on both sides of our organization, and I will leave it at that because it really just depends on what you're looking for. Are you looking for an opportunity to work at a corporation, on the corporate side, and maybe build a program or make some changes to their program, or are you keen to be on the service provider side and help bring some positive changes there? And I have had a great experience on both sides of the coin, if you will. And I wish I had the silver bullet answer for that one, Sandy.
Yeah. How do we get to yes? Agree. I agree with that, Tessa. Thanks for that comment. And Vicki, what's your perspective on this? You've worked with enough corporations at various levels within the corporation, and what is some of their opinions as far as developing that talent, either within our space or as service providers?
Yeah, I think that from a mobility side of it, just back to Ben's comment for a moment, the work that we do is so transferable into so many industries. I think about my counselors who are such skilled service professionals, and think about all of the service businesses that are out there. I think about our international teams, our tax and comp teams, and the transferable skills over into payroll on the corporate side. I mean, that's the one thing I think that sucked me in about the mobility business is, we all say no 2 days are ever the same. But the work is so varied, and there are so many doors to open inside of mobility, and such a short path, if you will, to be able to explore those doors. Where I think about, a large corporation where if you wanted to switch from one department to another, my gosh, you better know someone to help you get that door open, right? Because the silos go up in some of these really large organizations. But the beauty of growing your career in the mobility arena is that, our organizations don't have all those complexities. And yet, I think about a counselor, they touch almost every department in our organization in some form or fashion. So the ability to move from a counseling role into another departmental role is relatively easy because they get exposed to so much. And then add on to that all of the different corporate cultures that they get to work with. I mean, the skill level just from the exposure on the mobility side alone is a great resume builder.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about client service, and both of you are on that side of the organization where it's so critical to have that superior, if you will, extraordinary employee experience that we're all going after today. And yet at the same point, we have the stresses of working remote, the stresses of what's going on with the market going up and down and the volumes coming in and then slowing back and things like that. How do you keep those individuals in that right frame of mind? William, why don't you take that one first?
Gosh, Sandy, I wish I had the silver bullet on that one. I think it's really about understanding that our industry and the journey of the transferee is one of peaks and valleys. And it's again, to second Vicki's comment a few minutes ago, it's no 2 days are alike. And I think again, great leaders in our industry, great consultants, great client service directors, great supply chain owners are ones who appreciate that there are going to be struggles on a day-to-day basis, and we're going to overcome it as a team, and we're going to do the right thing by the employee, and we're going to find a way to how do we get to yes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I back up a second here, Vicki, you were talking about sort of corporates and suppliers and working together. And I think one of the things that I noticed that happened on the corporate side is, and this tends to happen as the company grows and the complexity of the program grows and the complexity of getting things done at a massive organization grows, you start to see mobility leaders who sort of say, you know what, I'm going to choose my battles wisely, and I don't necessarily want to make any changes. But if we all agree that change is a constant and change is necessary to constantly improve, then we as service providers need to find ways to support our corporate clients and help them bring those changes to their organization and make sure that they're not giving up and that they're fighting that good fight, right? And I will say, look, having spent 15 years on the corporate side, there were many times where I may have had an opportunity to make a change where I simply said, this is just going to be another one of those death by meeting examples, and I'm not really up for the 25 meetings only to get to know. So you kind of give up. And I know I didn't answer your question there, Sandy.
I'd love to hear, William, I'd love to hear from the audience if anybody's had experiences with this or had challenges around this, because you've got two senior leaders here in the in the industry that can help you. How do I get there? What do I do as a reload director? What do I do as a household goods salesperson? What do I do as an RMC salesperson to advance my career or to take the next move? Or relocation counselor, Vicki, to your point. I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, but let's ask the audience. Stacy, if you can throw up any questions, we're willing to take those. But Vicki, anything there as you continue to think about how people might be looking at raising their hands, because you've talked about engagement and things like that, but also how you encourage people to raise their hands?
Yeah, I think you showcase those that do, to demonstrate that it's a comfortable environment to be bold, to bring your idea forward. Many times I'll throw a town hall and you get crickets, right, when you ask for any questions. But so you really want to recognize those that are bold enough to jump in and showcase their participation and the outcomes from that. We have something inside our organization that we call an optimization lab, where we really encourage the ground level employees to bring forward ideas. If you see a problem with a process or something that doesn't work as well as you think it should, and you have ideas about how to fix it, let's sit down and chat about those, put those in a business case, and we actually give our employees the opportunity to present that case to the senior leadership, which gives nice visibility. So I think finding ways to really encourage folks to be bold, and that is what it takes today. You have to, through networking or raising your hand, reaching out, you have to own your destiny to some extent. But we can encourage that as an employer and make it a safe space for them to do that.
100%, Vicki. I could not agree more. And I'm sorry to always refer back to my time at Adobe, but one of the founders of Adobe, Chuck Geschke, who passed away last year, unfortunately, was well known for a very famous phrase where, he and this was really within the corporate values, is great ideas come from anywhere within the company. So how do you create mechanisms to make sure that those ideas continue to flow no matter what level you're at?
And I think we've talked about it from an industry too. When you think about it, you go to the local regional events. We've talked about that in previous sessions, and you raise your hand to be involved in planning committees and different aspects of that to get involved. And I referred to a few weeks ago about the Chicago CRC event, where we had an Ignite session where many of the speakers, if not all of them, were fairly younger professionals in the industry, and they did a fabulous job. But that was really out of their comfort zone, and pulling people out of their comfort zone and getting up in front of 100+ people is one thing, But getting out of your comfort zone and saying, I'm going to some of the senior leaders within my organization to see how I can go. Some of us have that and some of us don't. So that's to me where the challenge really lies.
Right.
So any other examples that, William, you have as far as, you know, getting to that emotional position?
Wow. Off the top of my head, Sandy, no, I can't think of any examples here.
Well, Christina's asking a question here, and she'd like to know how to jump from one side to the other, the supplier to the corporate, and how can you show the skills transfer when it's been so segregated for so long, like William said about corporate versus supplier? It's a great question, Christina. Thank you for that. What's your take on that? Either of you?
I mean, ultimately, it's a service industry, right? And so whether you were on the household goods side or temp housing or a relo consultant or a mobility specialist, it is bringing that empathetic mindset and bringing that, you know, how do we do right by the employee and their family? And what are the systems and processes and tools and suppliers that make all of that magic happen? And so I think it's finding a way to really sell your skills. Again, whether you're coming from the supplier side and aiming for a job on the corporate side, finding a way to really position those skills as completely transferable. They truly are, and I get it. That's easier said than done. You still have to go, you know, sell that to the hiring manager or the recruiter. But hopefully they appreciate that it is really that the industry is built around this this framework of an ecosystem where we all operate, you know, as one voice, and they can appreciate that those skills translate.
Well, and I find it interesting, Vicki. I know at Weichert we have a lot of relocation counselors that have either been corporate representatives at one point in their career and they've now come over to be relocation counselors, or on the flip side of that, they're relocation counselors and now they're being hired into a corporate. So from that vantage point, how do you see that transition? I see it as pretty healthy.
Yeah, I would too. And I think it comes back to that curiosity. So I'm thinking about Christina's question here. You know, what do you know about the corporation that you're trying to become part of? What are the challenges in their relocation program? What knowledge do you have or experience that might help them solve those challenges that they have? So I do think you have to be really curious, you know, use your network, find out, you know, what other suppliers you might know that have worked with that corporation and what challenges they've encountered as they've tried to be their service provider. And then thinking again about your experience and how it might translate and really being able to, you know, show the value that you could bring to them because you've educated yourself through your curiosity about what they need most and how you can solve that problem for them.
Yeah. And I think Tessa brings up a great point here. It's not just getting involved in the industry, but it's also getting involved within your organization. So that could be any of the service suppliers as well as our corporates that I know Tessa, I know for a fact she's on the board for the Detroit Relocation Council, and she's very much brought awesome speakers to educational sessions. And she's also very involved in Ford. So it's a matter of getting involved in having your voice heard and hearing other voices. So I know we're coming to the top of the hour here, so I want to be respectful of people's time. Vicki, why don't we go with you first? What final thoughts do you have for everybody as far as really mentoring for high potentials?
Yeah. You know, the final thought I might have, Sandy, is as folks are thinking about building their career and the stepping blocks that they'd like to make, to know that it's not so much anymore a ladder directly up, but oftentimes moving sideways in your career to build a new skill or a new experience. So again, you know, if you're really interested in the long term, consider moving laterally to take the step up versus just one stepping point to the next.
No, I think that's great advice. How about you, William?
Well, I think that certainly applies to Christina's question around if you're looking to make that move, right? So be willing to maybe take that one step back in order to go two steps forward. I think as leaders, you know, we have an obligation to high potentials to get them in the game, identify those projects and those opportunities to get them in the game and let them learn and let them know that it's okay to fail. I think one of the other items, and I know this is perhaps a whole separate Love and Relo episode, is as an industry, we think that there's no such thing. We can't fail. And granted, we are dealing with people's lives and their livelihoods and their families.
Right.
But we need to find a mechanism to embrace failure as a way to learn and grow, and just acknowledge that is okay. And I think, again, as leaders, we have an obligation there. So for me, it's find those high potentials, find out what they're interested in, and get them, and find opportunities to get them in the game.
I think that's awesome. So I have to thank both of you for your graciousness of putting up with all the technology challenges we've had today, yet at the same point, bringing a quality show to us. So thank you, Vicki. Thank you, William, for that. And to the audience, I welcome you to continue to reach out to us during the mentoring program. And in 2 weeks, on August the 12th, we are going to be having our corporate session. So there'll be more information coming out, but I know Tessa Boone at Ford and Jody Harris and Vinny at UPS are all going to join us. And I think it's going to be an awesome session and something you don't want to miss. And Ben, I don't know if you can hear us, but if you can, any closing thoughts for you? He's just smiling.
He's frozen. That's okay.
So we thank you, Ben. We thank you. We made it through. So thank you, guys. And we welcome you back. And mentoring matters, and live with passion, folks. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.